Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. China and Pakistan's all-weather friendship has reached yet another turning point as Islamabad looks to Beijing to help replace US military aid and technical cooperation. US-Pakistan relations have frayed since President Donald Trump last month set out a new Afghanistan policy and lashed out at nuclear-armed Pakistan as a fickle ally that gives safe havens to agents of chaos by harboring the Afghan Taliban and other militants. Washington's civilian and military assistance to Pakistan was less than $1 billion in 2016, down from a recent peak of $3.5 billion in 2011. And Abbasi, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, warned that Washington will not achieve its counter-terrorism aims by starving Pakistan of funds. Abbasi said one practical side effect of military aid cuts and US Congress blocking the sale of subsidized F-16 fighter jets to Pakistan will be to force Islamabad to buy weapons from China. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze if Pakistan can force a shift in US's South Asia policy by playing the China card. Joining me on the program today are Ambassador Shashank, former Foreign Secretary, Major General S.B. Asthana, retired defense expert, and Dhruva Jaishankar, fellow foreign policy, Brookings, India. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin with you. Can Pakistan play the China card and, force the US to change its South Asia policy?
Well, it's already playing the China card and it has played it very successfully all this time. Only thing is that President Trump is not the one who goes on the basis of advice given by the administration people completely. Secondly, China also is getting a bit fed up by the pressures from all kinds of other international players that why is China supporting terrorist activities spewing out of Pakistan. So therefore, you saw that recently in BRICS summit, China agreed to name a few terrorist groups which are based in Pakistan. Some of them hurt the Chinese interests also. So therefore, one has to see that while the Americans have not completely formulated their Asia policy or foreign policy completely, and that is still works in the making. So Pakistan may be able to change a little bit, but one has to also see that President Trump seems to bring about a radical change in the foreign policy with regard to dealing with the terrorists. And that was his first and foremost policy pronouncement which he made during the election campaign and which he has carried on. The only problem occurred that when he wanted to befriend Russia in order to deal with the terrorists in Middle East, and that is where the establishment worked against it, saying that the Russians had tried to interfere in the American elections, and therefore one cannot simply...
The hatred towards Russia is so deep-rooted in the US that, it doesn't look like the two heads of state can come together.
Well, no, they have come together several times. Only thing is that there are sanctions on Russia. Now, more sanctions are being imposed on the Russian entities dealing with North Korea. So, therefore, this problem will remain.
Sure.
That America will have to put sanctions on Russia, strengthen those sanctions, and at the same time, President Trump knows that if he has to deal with the terrorists, he would have to make friends with India, and maybe also have some kind of a modicum of relationship with Russia and China.
Sure. It does seem, General, that the United States is getting closer towards India. Trump has made several overtures. But will Trump's South Asia policy succeed without Pakistan?
In my opinion, Trump's policy of South Asia gives out some very clear-cut messages. And these messages are so intense and they are in an incremental mode from where he started. The first thing when he took over, he started was that I want safe America. Now his policy says, if you read out the policy, that I want to hit all safe sanctuaries. My aim and my interest is absolutely clear that I have to kill terrorists. And if safe sanctuaries exist wherever, I am going to hit that. I am for national building. So that is one point which he makes very clearly. Second is, we give, I think, too much of credentials to Pakistan. As far as China card is concerned, in my opinion, this card does not exist. Why Pakistan is worried and is trying to again sit in the lap of China is that this 1 billion aid and these are very small things, 1 billion aid and F-16 getting blocked and things like that. These are very small things. What is most important is that if Trump strikes by drones in China, in Pakistan, in the safe sanctuaries, China is not going to help him. And China is not going to, in any case, even create any kind of noise also about it.
Do you suspect then the all-weather friendship between Pakistan and China is going to be tested sometime soon?
In case of terrorism, if he is hitting terrorists, there is no question that China is going to disturb his equation with US. China-US relation is at a different level. China will like to play his card himself, and then instead of letting Pakistan playing his card on his behalf.
Sure.
So China's relationship is at a different level, and Pakistan is a minor segment of that relationship.
You know, Dhruva, Jaishankar, taking off from what the General has just said, you know, we saw ties reaching a similar low ebb in 2011 when the US struck at Abbottabad. The Pakistanis tried to play the Chinese card then, but China kind of backed off and spoke to Islamabad and Washington both and said, you know, sort out your differences yourselves. Do you see that happening yet again?
Well, some things have been quite consistent. Some things have obviously changed. The China-Pakistan relationship, of course, goes back much farther. It goes back to the 1960s and really developed in the 1970s. It involved a level of nuclear proliferation and missile proliferation that has continued. At the same time, China has in the past at various points not really come to Pakistan's assistance when it really needed it. I mean, there was a consideration during 1971 of China intervening, and it did not. During the Kargil War in '99, China actually chastised Pakistan for behaving in an irresponsible manner. At times in 2010, 2011, when the Pakistani economy was in dire straits, China did not come to Pakistan's assistance. But what we've seen actually in the last few years in the interim period has been a somewhat changed relationship between China and Pakistan, and that is no longer just a military relationship that is defined by the People's Liberation Army, but actually also increasingly an economic relationship in the form of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This will create a slightly different and new dynamic, a different kind of dependency factor. But I do think it's important to keep some things in mind. Overall, since 2001, $33 billion of US assistance has gone into Pakistan, military and civilian. Of course, you know, some of it has been reimbursements for Pakistani military expenses, but overall 33 billion. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is currently estimated as 62 billion, at least that's the figure that is officially. So we're talking about something that's not on, you know, on a similar scale, larger of course, but not fundamentally different. There will also be cultural differences that will come into play, and I think we just saw there was a video that circulated just in the last few days of a Chinese person, a woman, abusing a Pakistani shop owner. And this video went viral in Pakistan. So I think we will start seeing now some clashes, so some differences appear as this relationship continues. But I don't think it's as easy to say that it'll be a repeat of the past and China will not come to Pakistan's assistance in all circumstances.
You know, taking cue from what Dhruva has just said, Ambassador, the Chinese have come to Pakistan's aid in the recent past. We've seen them at international fora supporting Pakistan. We've also seen them during the Yemen crisis when Saudi and the UAE wanted Pakistan to intervene militarily. They promised them some economic doles and they said that, you know, do not participate. So they have of late fallen back on China. Pakistan has done that. But the question really is, how far is China going to go to support Pakistan? Like Dhruva just mentioned, you know, do you believe that the stakes are very high for China in Pakistan at the moment with CPEC and other projects?
I think this is a rare opportunity which China has got in Pakistan. All along they were having a very good relationship only with North Korea on one side, and they continued building up a similar kind of relationship with Pakistan and also helped in some way exchanging missile and nuclear technology between North Korea and Pakistan. I think finally they have found Pakistan is in a situation where they are under pressure from Saudis. On the other hand, the Americans are putting pressure on them. So Chinese feel that this is the right time when they should really give them so much of loan that they can easily convert all that debt into equity and then own real estate, agricultural farms, etc. And if you find that the Pakistanis are learning, the youngsters in Pakistan are learning Chinese, which seems to be the most popular language now, in addition to Arabic. So I think you will see a big change coming up in the next 10-15 years, because Chinese wages are increasing continuously. In Pakistan, they would be still reasonable. They have also told the Pakistanis to put about 12 to 15,000 troops to protect the Chinese workers there. They are sending their own troops and security forces there. So therefore, this is a kind of a relationship which they might not just now push through completely if the Americans really come down hard on the Pakistanis. But in the long term, I think they are trying to build up this relationship, because unlike the relations with countries like Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar and others who would like to balance off their relations with China and India, Pakistan would like to go all out in order to somehow contain India within South Asia, within a corner which they had done successfully all this time. Now they feel that the Indians getting away.
Is that the biggest mistake that Pakistan is making, putting all its eggs in one basket?
Well, that we will come to know later. Only thing is that one impact, positive impact, would be that Chinese would insist that Pakistan must behave like a normal state and should curb the terrorist activity. So on one hand, the Americans are going to put their drones there, and on the other hand, Chinese would put a lot of dollars and whatever yuan there. And at the same time, they would say that, look, you must curb the terrorist activities coming out of Pakistan. In the past, you remember, Chinese had signed some secret agreements with the Taliban in Afghanistan that they should not hurt the Chinese interests, but they can go and hurt any other neighboring country's interests. This time, I think the Chinese perhaps would not do that. They would like Pakistan to curb all of them, because many of their people who are fighting Eastern Islamic group, they are based in Pakistan, Afghanistan border area, and there are so many training camps there. So the Chinese have to be mindful of that. So therefore, while India has to be careful that Chinese soldiers now will not only be on the Chinese border, but will also be on the Pakistani side as well.
That's a real concern as far as India is concerned.
So that is an Indian concern.
Yes.
But as far as the American foreign policy is concerned, it's a different issue.
Sure. You know, how big a concern is that, General? You know, the Chinese military, the PLA, you know, confronting India possibly from Pakistan as well?
As far as the military presence is concerned, the presence has already started in some manner. In our calculus and in our strategic war gaming, we will have to take note of that. That cannot be disputed.
So the general statement, the Army General statement of getting ready for a two-pronged war, is it really on the cards?
No. The Army General's statement, when he says two-pronged war, it is that in case we have something going with China, or say some kind of showdown with China, or a war with China, or a conflict with China, or a minor engagement with China, Pakistan can take advantage of that, and that is what he means by two-front war.
And that's what we should be concerned about.
Yeah. China attacking from two sides, which includes Pakistan. That was, I don't think that was the intent.
Sure.
But what I am trying to say is that as far as the troops movement is concerned, the Pakistan is being used by China for their interest. As of now, China's main interest is the economical interest and not the other part. And they are more interested in CPEC and Gwadar and their base in Gwadar and getting converted into military base subsequently at a later stage. And similarly, the investments which my colleague has already spoken. The military part of using it as a frontline state against India is being done by the terrorists. And that the ISI is managing it. Now, as far as the ambassador spoke about the US part, if you see, let's take 5 years back. The situation was China was still Pakistan's friend, US was physically present in Pakistan, and both of them had no problems. And both of them were in strategic competition with each other. The US and China were in strategic competition with each other. But at the same time, these three countries were managing that relationship because that strategic piece of land was important to both, to everyone. And that is how they managed their relation. And China did not either object or told Pakistan to not to cooperate with US. Till now, till date, it has not happened. So you must keep that part also in mind. So
sure.
As far as the US influence is concerned, it's not that US influence is just for the heck of it. The military power of US, the fact that US defense budget is 5 times China even today, and the gap already is so much that it will take, I think, 2 decades for China to catch up. It's not that easy. Sure. But as far as India is concerned, yes, we have to be careful. We have to assume that for protection of CPEC, finally the PLA will have to step. These militants are against every foreigner in Pakistan, including China.
Sure. And
their terror industry gets disturbed whenever a foreigner enters.
Okay.
So that is their narrative.
Dhruva, you know, I'm just going to take you from what the general has just said. Better relations between Islamabad and Washington, is it in China's interest also because it offsets better ties between Delhi and Washington?
You know, I think it's a complicated set of triangles here that we have. Pakistan, China, India, China, Pakistan, US, India, Pakistan, US. You know, how these relationships shape up. And I think it creates some dilemmas also for India. You know, is it in Indian interest, for example, that the US has some leverage with Pakistan? There have been points of time in the recent past, including where the US has employed that leverage to achieve certain ends that have been positive from India's standpoint. Or is it in India's interest for the US to join India in Pakistan's isolation? And there's a bit of a tension, I think, between those two objectives. So I think quite similarly, I think from China's point of view, having you know, a US role, particularly as a stabilizing force in Afghanistan. I mean, the Chinese do have investments in Afghanistan, some of which they cannot fully exploit because of lack of security.
And they do want a safe haven for Uyghurs there in Afghanistan.
Oh, so that is also a concern. So I mean, the US security presence is a factor. On the other hand, of course, the more the US is bogged down there and distracted there, you know, maybe it does benefit Chinese interests. I would say, you know, I think a few things to keep in mind. One, there has been, as part of an engagement policy, you know, a reconciliation strategy, the quadrilateral talks involving Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, and the United States. And those really haven't borne much fruit. And in fact, all the parties appear to be quite disgruntled with the effort for sometimes for different reasons. So I think if that the failure or the failing state of those talks are any indication, it suggests that the primary interests of all the parties there are not really quite compatible. And so I would be a little less sanguine, perhaps, than some others on whether China and the United States can reach some accommodation there. Similarly, I think you know, when it comes to Chinese concerns about terrorism in Afghanistan and Pakistan, they do exhibit quite a high tolerance for terrorism targeting other actors, whether it's the United States or India, and have seem to have quite narrow interests when it comes to forces, you know, just groups such as ETIM, which are active in Xinjiang and against Chinese targets. So I think, you know, for the foreseeable future, we will see China taking a very narrow approach to counterterrorism and not necessarily an enlightened self-interest approach that would converge with India. We did see a statement at the BRICS summit that seemed to indicate a bit of a meeting of the minds, but I think the proof is in the pudding.
Okay, fair enough. You know, Ambassador, going by what happened at the BRICS and, you know, in Xiamen, where the Chinese denounced terror groups within Pakistan itself, does that mean that China's policy towards Pakistan is changing, or can we expect that anytime in the near future?
Now, some review is going on, because when President Trump announced his policy on Afghanistan and South Asia, he did not have any word to say about China. Pakistan, yes, specifically he talked against Pakistan supporting the terrorist groups, and he gave them very clear-cut warning, but there were no warning, no friendly advice for China, and therefore it may have put China at a little bit of a discomfiture, and perhaps Russia were able to then move China towards a position where China thinks that, you know, if their BRI initiative will not make much headway unless they really take into account the interests of the various South Asian countries also. And it is not only India, but other countries in South Asia which are also hurt by the terrorist groups working from Pakistan. So therefore, I see BRICS declaration as a beginning, but as a tentative beginning, which we have to push through and see whether the Chinese are really serious about playing a meaningful role as a leading power of Asia, or they would like to play what Dhruv mentioned, their own interests, a very narrow-minded interest. So that we'll have to wait.
Indeed, we'll have to wait and see what really happens as far as China is concerned. But General, do you believe that America is losing its foothold in South Asia?
I don't believe exactly in the manner in which you put it across, but I would like to say something else. You see, what has happened is that there is a fear in America that if the vacuum which is being created in Afghanistan with fair amount of ingress of Taliban and also with territory being the caliphate being shrinking every day of ISIS, they are worried that ISIS, Al-Qaeda can get stronger. And as per President Trump, they don't want a regime which could comfort a terrorist group to become strong enough to hit his mainland. So if that is the case, then that strategic piece of land, they will not like to share with anybody. And that is coming out very clearly when he says a trilateral security agreement or arrangement in which he includes only USA, Afghanistan and India and cuts out Russia and China and Pakistan. So that means they are looking at that strategic space. They don't want to leave that strategic space for anybody else.
Sure.
So that is of interest to them.
So all these nations which are being left out, do you fear, Dhruva, that there's a bloc going to be formed between them? Russia, China, Pakistan and Turkey probably coming together, because the Pakistani foreign minister has gone and met his counterparts from all these countries.
Well, I mean, some of this transcends even what has happened in the last month or two, and I don't think in that sense President Trump's speech and the change in US postures in Afghanistan is going to change larger geopolitical dynamics in the region. What we have been seeing over the last few years is different interests realigning in this region. I think from India's point of view, the two key ones to look at are not necessarily Pakistan and China, who've been quite consistent at least, but really Russia and Iran. And particularly the rise of the Islamic State and the concerns about that in Afghanistan seem to have altered the balance of threat, if you will, in Tehran and in Moscow. In a manner that I think is not necessarily a positive one from India's standpoint, in the sense that there's now there appears to be now an increasing willingness to accommodate the Taliban in Afghanistan. And so I think that therein lies, I think, a larger concern, which is, will we now be seeing in some ways a growing acceptance of the Taliban, not just by Pakistan, which has been a sponsor of the Quetta Shura, but increasingly by other outside actors. In fact, India and the United States seem to be alone in terms of backing the government in Kabul to the hilt. So I think that is really a point of concern. We'll have to see how that evolves, but I'm not sure it's just because of what has happened in the last month since President Trump's speech.
All right. On that note, then, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank my guests, Ambassador Shashank, Major General SB Asthana and Dhruva Jaishankar. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.